Janet Jackson, Demita Joe, Miss Jackson if you're nasty, uh, Penny from Good Times. Yeah, I'm gonna rank her albums. Just a heads up, I won't be including Janet's first two albums on this list for a few reasons. I mean, even if they were on the list, they'd be at the bottom just because even Janet herself doesn't necessarily consider these to be her, to be a part of her discography. Like they are, but they aren't. I think it's pretty much universally agreed upon that Control was her debut album, but I don't think these albums are bad. They're definitely very enjoyable albums, very listenable. But including them wouldn't really serve any purpose, to me at least, because they would have been at the bottom. But if I didn't mention them, everybody in the comments would be like, oh, what about her first two albums? Oh, but check them out. I think they're really good. But yeah, so let's move on to the proper album ranking. Unbreakable is a good album. I remember being so excited for it to come out because it was Janet's first proper release in a while, and I was just so ready for whatever she was going to put out. It was her first album as a mother and her first and currently only album of the 2010s, and it was also the first album of hers that I remember, like the lead up to its release. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to her beforehand. Not like I wasn't a fan, just I wasn't really tuned in to her releases before. So it was the first one that I was really anticipating, I guess. It's far more toned down and reserved, stark contrast to her 2000s run of albums. Unbreakable is not one of my favorite Janet albums by far, obviously. It's at the bottom of the list, but I think it's still a decent record. It starts off strong. I love Burn It Up and Damn Baby. Those are two of my favorites. The latter specifically should have been a decent hit from her. Honestly, it's very much bop. Some more favorites of mine from this one are Night, the lead single No Sleep, To Be Loved, and Take Me Away. Night specifically is a very infectious club record. It gives me Rock With You vibes from Janet's Discipline album. But yeah, I can't help but move when I listen to that one. Overall, the album is a little too slow for me, I will say. It's very mellow, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I would have liked a few more dance songs, just generally up-tempo tracks here and there. Again, I understand it was her first release since having her child and getting remarried, and also, since losing Michael, and so those were definitely topics that would have felt weird if she had left them off the album, so I get it, but I hardly revisit this one, if I'm being honest. I don't think I've listened to it all the way through since it came out. I'll pick and choose which song I want to listen to, but overall I haven't really sat down and re-listened to it as a whole. But I'm excited for her next record, regardless, whenever that comes out. Okay, 20 20 years old, 20 years old, I don't know. I remember being so annoyed, and to this day I'm still very annoyed with the title choice of this album. But anyway, I don't know where to start with this album, honestly. Well, let's just start with the title. I hate it. I hate the title. I hate it. And even knowing its meaning, I still think it's odd. It makes no sense to me. It doesn't sound good. Looking at it, it's like, okay, is it 20 20 years old? Like, yeah, most people will know to say 20 years old, but it makes no sense to me. So you're celebrating 20 years since Control. Okay, cool. Judging by the intro of the album, this record was supposed to be a celebration of the last 20 years of Janet's legacy at the time. Okay, that's a nice concept, but the album doesn't do any of that. There's nothing here that indicates that this album is a tribute to Janet's legacy. In the album's intro, she says that she's talked about everything, and it's implied that she just wants to have fun. And okay, fine, I'm all for that. The album isn't supposed to be anything serious. My issue with 20 years old is that as an album, it just feels unfocused, confused as to what exactly it wants to be. It's definitely not bad, but it's nothing special to me either. You've got two different themes here, and I use the term themes very loosely. The album is somehow trying to be a tribute to her legacy, but at the same time, it's supposed to be her just having fun. 20 years old does a lot, but doesn't do anything at all at the same time. And all of this could be excused had the album's production been somewhat decent, but goodness, my God, this album is, a lot of it is just noise to me. The only reason why it isn't at the bottom of my list is because Call on Me is one of my all-time favorite songs from Janet, and it, alongside So Excited With You and Take Care, carry this album to me. This is hands down Janet's most forgettable album, excluding her first two, and I mean, you could throw Unbreakable in there as well. I tried to give it due credit, but it's very hard. And I don't want to pin all the blame on anyone, but if I had to blame one person here, it would be Jermaine Dupri. Now, before I say anything else, Jermaine Dupri is a legend. That is objective fact. That man is responsible for giving the world some of the greatest R&B records of the last 30 years. His work in the 2000s with Mariah is some of her greatest work. But what confuses me is how that didn't translate to Janet. The same man that was responsible for the emancipation of Mimi created this. I don't get it. Again, 20 years old is not a bad record. It's just unfocused. A lot of it is just not memorable, and I don't know what's going on with it. I will say, after listening to it again recently, that the album does improve a lot at the halfway mark. Just when I was about to kind of tap out, because I had completely zoned out, latter songs like Daybreak and Enjoy caught my attention on my most recent listen. But overall, most of the album just doesn't feel like Janet to me. I don't know how to describe it. It just feels like a lot of the songs, they were not made with Janet in mind. Rather, they were created and then Janet hopped on them. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. Sorry if you like this album, but it has never done anything for me. Never. And going into this ranking, I was like, I'm going to try again. I'm going to really try and like 20 years old. And I came out of it even more like confused and displeased than before. Discipline was a step up from 20 years old in so many ways. Definitely one of Janet's more underrated releases. I love the experimental vibe of this album. It's sexy, it's futuristic, it's dark but sensual. Feedback is hands down one of Janet's best singles, and the fact that it was literally her best-selling single in 8 years at that point, despite her actively being blacklisted, is saying something. Peaking at number 19 while having the higher-ups behind the scenes actively working against you is nothing to scoff at. Feedback honestly should have been to Janet what Touch My Body was to Mariah. It should have been so big, and it would have been undoubtedly had it not been for the aftermath of that Super Bowl incident. Rock With You is without a doubt one of my favorite songs of all time. I'm absolutely obsessed with that song. It's so sexy and funky and hypnotic and futuristic sounding. It's a club ready jam. I'm very obsessed with that song, and I love the video too. The choreography is so tight, pristine looking, and it's just so satisfying to watch. It's honestly insane. More of my favorites from this one, Love and Can't Be Good, So Much Better, and the title track are two faves of mine as well. But overall, Discipline is a very underrated Janet album. I love it so much. I honestly feel the same way about Demita Joe that I feel about Mariah's Charm Bracelet, and I know I keep comparing the two of them, but their discographies are very similar in a lot of ways to me, and just the way that they evolved and adapted to each decade. Demita Joe is, again, another one of Janet's underrated albums and eras. High quality but overlooked, but in this case it was due to the industry blacklisting her following the Super Bowl incident that happened the same year. Demita Joe was doomed before it even had a chance to drop, and I hate that because there's so much to offer from this record. Production wise, it's some of Janet's best work, honestly. It was the perfect sequel and follow-up to All For You. Songs like Strawberry Bounce and I Want You are two of my favorites from this record, and hidden gems in Janet's discography. Demita Joe, again, it felt like a sequel to All For You. And not to mention, Janet looked absolutely phenomenal during this era. All of her promotional appearances and performances were so on point. All Night Don't Stop is another highlight from this record that should have been a smash for her. R&B Junkie is amazing as well. Slow Love is another one. The album's lead single, Just a Little While, honestly doesn't do it for me though. It was an interesting choice as a lead single, and I've kept trying to listen to it over and over again, and it just never clicked with me. I don't know, I just haven't gotten it yet. Maybe I will one day. But personally, I think All Night Don't Stop should have been the lead. but oh well. I look at the Demita Joe era and I get sad, honestly, because after the success of All For You, it was inevitable that Janet was approaching her own renaissance in the new millennium. But that Super Bowl incident, which mind you was not her fault and was blown way out of proportion, just ruined all of that. Essentially, the rest of her efforts in the 2000s would be doomed to be overlooked because of how the industry shunned her. I love All For You. It's a fantastic early 2000s album. The era in particular I love because it was such an interesting reset and rebrand for Janet after the Velvet Rope. She went back to that sexiness of the self-titled era, but this time it's way more mature and sexy. It was different. I don't know how to describe it, but if you're a Janet fan, you know what I'm talking about. I love the context of All For You's release as well. It came right after her divorce from her longtime husband, Renee, and I just thought it was very interesting that she decided to make a happy up-tempo album despite all of that. There's hardly any kind of sadness or somberness on All For You. It's just a fun, high-energy album. It's a feel-good album. It's sexy. It makes you move from the get-go with You Ain't Right, and then the title track, which is one of Janet's best singles by far. An absolute classic. Come On Get Up is more of that feel-good energy that this album brings. When We Ooh is mesmerizing and smooth. Would You Mind is, that song. If you know, you know, and if you don't know, then go listen to it. But I think it's pretty common knowledge at this point. Trust to Try is great. Son of a Gun is great. Someone to Call My Lover, Feel So Right, Doesn't Really Matter. The list goes on and on and on. This is a phenomenal album. I love this album so much. It's the epitome of a perfect, fun, feel-good record, in my opinion. Janet's self-titled fifth album is honestly something that I overlooked for the longest time. One of the last ones that I listened to in full. I loved all the singles, but I never really bothered to dive into it properly. It was honestly one of my least favorite Janet eras and albums. If I had made this ranking a few years back, Janet would have been far lower. But it was Janet's Liberation era, and one that was executed so perfectly that alone put it above a lot of her other albums. The sexy Janet that became her signature sound really started with this album, and as time went on, I started to appreciate this record a lot more. I really think it was because this was a more slow and sultry record compared to albums like Rhythm Nation and Control. But all that aside, Self-Titled is a peak 90s R&B record through and through. It's a very cohesive album. It's an experience. I mean, all of Janet's are, but this one specifically, it does so much sonically and thematically, and it has a very hypnotic vibe to it. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's just it puts you at ease, honestly. That's the Way Love Goes just does something to me. I adore that song so much. If is a staple Janet song. Choreo is iconic. I love the video so much. You Want This is a great 90s jam. Throb is absolutely pulsating. It's a phenomenal club ready song. I could listen to that song on repeat for hours. It's one of my absolute favorite Janet songs. Funky Big Band, Because of Love are great. The slower, more sensual tracks are heavy hitters as well. Every time Again plays at the end credits of Poetic Justice, I just get misty-eyed. Where Are You Now, The Body That Loves You, Anytime, Any Place, and Whoops Now are favorites of mine as well. I feel like I always have one questionable entry on my list, and maybe having Control up this high is a choice, a quote-unquote choice. But to me, Control is, not even to me, I feel like objectively, Control is a legendary record, and it's a classic, and I love it for so many reasons. Its overall theme of liberation of a young Janet who'd been in the shadow of her brothers all her life. The cohesion of its sound, its distinct sound. It's a very concise record, much like her brother Michael's Thriller. It's only 9 tracks, but there's not a single skip on it, and the bulk of the album is nothing but certified hits. Very rarely is an artist's debut album this high on my list. Yes, I know it's not her true debut, but it kind of is. Control is just a solid record through and through. There's no misses. It's cohesive. There's no filler. I love every song on here. Every song outside of the only 2 non-singles is a classic. I honestly can't pick a favorite because I love them all so much, but my top 3 would have to be When I Think of You, The Pleasure Principle, and Funny How Time Flies. These are all just so infectious. I love them so much. And she had hits on top of hits from this record. She was kind of like one of the first females to really do that from one record, and she would only continue to one up herself. But Control is just, to me, quintessential Janet Jackson. It was monumental. Everything that came after it, we owe that to Control, which that alone makes it up there. It's top 3 easily. I would genuinely argue that Rhythm Nation is one of the most important albums ever created. An iconic landmark album, not only in Janet's career, but popular music as a whole. It's a body of work with a message. Many messages, actually. It discusses so many things, calling for awareness to so many topics, a lot of which are still issues to this very day. Racism, substance abuse, poverty, and violence, just to name a few. At the height of one's career, to want to do something like this is admittedly a bold move, but it paid off. What really sells Rhythm Nation is the fact that it quite simply sounds good. Not just good, but amazing. When I think of this album, I think of the ridiculously hard-hitting bass of its New Jack Swing production, most evident in tracks like Miss You Much, State of the World, The Knowledge, and the title track. This record was actually a pioneer of this rather short-lived genre. Even Michael admitted that the sound of Rhythm Nation influenced the sound of what would become his Dangerous album. For a lot of the songs on Rhythm Nation, the production is so infectious that you don't even realize that the subject is quite serious. But it isn't just serious topics. There's the usual romantic tracks here as well, and it all manages to sound very cohesive. And like Control before it, this album is nothing but hits, even the non-singles. Aside from the aforementioned songs, Love Will Never Do, Without You, and Come Back to Me are favorites of mine as well. It's truly Janet's magnum opus, in my opinion, and one of the best examples of a concept album that hits every mark. I love it so much. The Velvet Rope is an incredibly special album to me. By far the most outstanding entry in Janet's catalog. It was just conceptually so far away from anything that she had done or has done since. It has a very special place in my heart. This was really the first Janet album that I really dived into, and I was just amazed by everything. Like, it introduced me to the concept of interludes, and I think interludes are a lost art on albums. I miss when albums had interludes. I miss when albums had, not every album has to be a concept album, but I just miss feeling immersed in a body of work, and that's what The Velvet Rope does. The Velvet Rope is like a glimpse into Janet's mind at the time, and I made a video about that, so please feel free to check it out. I'll go into far more detail in there, but the Velvet Rope is a true progenitor to the alternative R&B sound that has become the standard for so many artists these days. It was so ahead of its time, and in true Janet fashion, there's so much to unpack here subject matter wise. I go into far more detail about it in my video, so please go check that out. But concisely, I was always amazed at what Janet chose to include in this album as far as subject matter goes, as well as production. Again, to be an artist at their peak and one that is so mainstream, to put themes on your album such as depression and bisexuality and other things in the 1990s, when the world was nowhere near as accepting as it is now of those things, was a very bold move. But that's just the type of artist that Janet is. I always call The Velvet Rope my first Janet Jackson album, and while I obviously knew a lot of her other songs, this was one of the first ones that I really sat down with and digested it, and I was blown away at it. I love The Velvet Rope because it embraces the things that other mainstream artists were afraid to talk about at the time. It truly was Janet's artistic peak, in my opinion, and one of the most important R&B and pop albums of all time. And there you have it, folks. That is the Janet Jackson albums ranked by yours truly, Wayne. My Mariah video ruffled a few feathers, but I'm more comfortable giving my opinions on these things because I think everybody's rankings are valid. I like reading y'all's rankings and seeing what y'all think and seeing if y'all agree with what I have to say or not. But That being said, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, I encourage you to go check out some of my other albums ranked videos. Like I mentioned, I have an albums ranked Mariah Carey, I have an albums ranked Beyonce, I have an albums ranked Ariana Grande, Rihanna, Lady Gaga, and more to come, but who else would you like to see me, rank their albums? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing. And I will see you all in the next video. Thank you so much. I love you all. Unbreakable is a good album. I remember being so excited for it to come out because it was Janet's first proper release in a while at the time, and I'm so ready for whatever she has. I read that so wrong. Unbreakable is a good album. I remember being so excited for it to come out because it was Janet's first proper release in a while at the time, and I was just so ready for whatever she was about to put out. It was her first album as a mother and her first and currently only album of the 2010s. Currently, we're out of the 2010s. Okay. It was her first album as a... Let's just start this all over again. I have to remember to cut all this. Unbreakable is a good album. I remember being so excited for it to come out because it was Janet's first proper release in a while at the time, and I'm so ready. I keep doing... We're gonna get it together. We're gonna get it together. We're gonna get it together. Okay.